Hello, everybody. Happy Halloween. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is a perfect night for this evening's presentation. It's cold and rainy, and we have a very special Halloween-themed program tonight featuring John Snyder. John has worked with us before through Comic-Con. He's a graphic artist, illustrator. He's been in the industry for about 35 years. Some of his works include Marvel and DC, an independent comic series, Fashion in Action, an adaptation of Lawrence Block's 8 Million Ways to Die, which I will admit is one of the best comics I've read in recent times. John also does some things with Underground Press, most notably the Duckburg Times and other independent comic book publishers, including Grendel for Dark Horse Comics. And tonight, John's going to speak about his newest project, which is an adaptation of G.D. Falksen's The Ouroboros Cycle, and that's going to be coming out soon, and we're going to start with that, and then we're going to look at just an historical view of comics through history, and we're going to start probably in the 60s and go forward. Everybody, we want questions, so please submit them in the question and answer session chat box, and we will get to them probably in around 30 minutes or so, so please be coming up with questions, put them in as we go, and we'll be happy to answer them. So I'm going to turn it over now to John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for stopping in to visit with us tonight. And I'm just going to walk you through some images here, basically what John had just discussed. And I'm just going to start off here with. I found this on. Are we ready?
One.
Okay.
And there.
Okay. So we're just going to start off here with my most recent project that I'm working on right now, which is an adaptation of a selection from the J.D. Falksen's horror historical fantasy series, the Ouroboros Cycle. And this will be a graphic novel adaptation of a section from the first book in this cycle called The Monster's Coming of Age. And these are some initial designs of some of the characters from the book that I will be adapting a section of. This is the Scion. These are two of the main protagonists, Yusef and Dr. Varanus. And here again is a close-up of Dr. Varanus and Yusef. And this series is set in the late 1880s. And this particular story is set in the Caucasus Mountains. And this is somewhere near Russia. And again, there's another shot of the Scion. And this is the cover of the first book of the series, which is the section I'll be adapting from. There are 5 books out currently from the series. Here are 3 of the covers. And there will be a 6th one coming out shortly. So I'm very excited to be working on this project, and it will be coming out. Hopefully, we're targeting the graphic novel for the end of 2021.
Artwork looks great.
Thank you. Thanks. So now we'll take a look at some old comic covers that have either Halloween or ghostly or monster themes, which is a recurring thing in comics, always very popular. And we'll go back all the way here to the 1940s. And this is a comic cavalcade cover from DC Comics featuring the Golden Age Flash there with the helmet, Wonder Woman in the center, and Green Lantern in his original costume there on the right. And as you can see, there with the jack-o'-lantern. And this is a recurring image in a lot of old comic covers. It's the jack-o'-lantern and Halloween theme. Usually these were targeted to come around Halloween, around October.
Right.
Here's another Golden Age DC comic with the Flash, again with some trick-or-treaters and some pumpkins there in the background. Again, this is from the 60s, and this is not necessarily a Halloween-oriented comic, but again, it's got a horror or haunted theme, in this case, a Batman ghost. And ghosts were popular. There was an issue with a Batman ghost, the world's finest. Here's Superman at a seance with a Clark Kent ghost. And here's the first issue of Lois Lane as a witch on a broom. Here's Jimmy Olsen as a werewolf in his comic. And again, there's the Halloween theme with the pumpkin and Huey, Dewey, and Louie trick-or-treating. And this issue was by Carl Barks for Walt Disney's Donald Duck Comics. There's another terrific cover with pumpkins again. And there we are again, and this is Bugs Bunny, the Warner Brothers characters. And this was from Dell Comics. This is from Harvey, who are the company that had like Casper and Wendy, the Good Witch. And there's more with the ghosts there. Little Dot, also a Harvey character.
Right.
Again, with the trick or treat theme. Oop, go back there. There's little Lulu, John Stanley character. And then the little Archie from Archie Comics. And again, a lot of Archie Comics often would have holiday themes, and again, would always have kind of a Halloween theme. And even we even have a Barbie comic, and this is from the I believe the 80s or early 90s, and that is from Marvel. And we'll get back to one of the probably the best known horror anthology comics, which were the EC comics of the 1950s. And this is an iconic cover, Tales from the Crypt number 24. And that cover art there is by Al Feldstein. And there's another classic Tales from the Crypt cover by Jack Davis. And these were popular anthology comics, and they've had an influence on so many aspects of culture and artists and writers, movie, TV people, and such. It was hosted, you had 3 hosts, the Old Witch, the Crypt Keeper, and you can see them featured there.
Yeah, I remember the HBO.
Yes, yeah. So yes, the series was so popular that it's shown up in various forms throughout the years.
Right.
There's been the HBO series, Tales from the Crypt, which was excellent. And that went over, and actually the anthology series was so popular that it was resurrected back in the 60s through Warren Magazine with Creepy and Eerie magazines. And that is the first issue of Creepy there, and that's by Jack Davis, who again worked on EC Comics. Vampirilla was a character that Warren Comics introduced in the 70s, who is still popular today. And horror hosts have also made it into comics, and this was an Elvira comic for DC,
yeah,
who was a television horror host in California.
Yeah,
That's how she started out at it.
late night show. Wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And okay, so this is Creepshow, which was inspired by the EC anthology comics and was a George Romero anthology movie.
Right.
And it's very popular. This was the comic adaptation. So we went from Tales from the Crypt being a comic to inspiring a movie. And here was the comic adaptation of the movie. This was by Bernie Wrightson. It was a Jack Kamen cover, who was also an EC artist. And I believe Creepshow is a television series right now. I think it's on the Shudder network.
It is, yeah.
Okay. So going back again here, I want to talk a little bit about classic novels, some of the beginning of monster history, which was like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which was published in let's just check here, published in 18, and Dracula, which was published in 1897. And those two characters are recurring characters in fiction, and they show up in comics, they show up in movies. But there was a series called Classic Comics, later known as Classics Illustrated. And this was an adaptation of Frankenstein in comic form. And here's a later version of it with a Norman Saunders cover. And he would go on to be the artist on Mars Attacks trading cards, which also became a movie later.
Yeah.
This is an early adaptation, comic adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde from Classic Comics. And this is an adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde for Classics Illustrated from 1990, which I had the good fortune to work on.
Right.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde was written by Robert Louis Stevenson and initially published in January of 1886. And again, like Frankenstein and Dracula, has had a history of being adapted for movies, television, and comics. So this was a version that I adapted back in 1990, and that was the title page from that. And that was great fun to work on. Enjoyed that thoroughly. Dell Comics, back in the 60s, did adaptations of the Universal monsters for a variety of one-shot comics. So here's the Dracula and the Mummy. Creature from the Black Lagoon, rather the creature here. The Wolfman. And here's Frankenstein, again with the Universal Boris Karloff look.
Right.
And that's a wonderful cover there. This is a version of the Frankenstein monster from the 1950s by artist and writer Dick Briefer. And it started out as a scary comic. As the series progressed, Briefer made the Frankenstein monster into more of a sort of anti-hero, and it had kind of a comedic bent to it.
Okay.
It's a very well thought of series, and it's been reprinted and is available. That's neat stuff. And again, here's where Frankenstein reappears in the 1970s. And this was for Marvel Comics. And this cover here is by Mike Ploog. Mm-hmm. And Marvel had a wave of 70s horror comics, which were quite popular. Here's Werewolf by Night, again, a cover by Mike Ploog from Marvel Comics. There. Oh, yeah. And here is a significant comic from Marvel from, I believe, 1973. That cover art is by Gene Colan and Tom Palmer, and it is the introduction of Blade, the Vampire Slayer. And I believe I've got here's the first panel. Also, Mark Wolfman, I believe, is a writer on that and co-creator. So that's the first appearance of Blade from 1973. And again, talking about how there's various influences of horror in comics and literature and how they all kind of intertwine. Blade later became the Wesley Snipes movie, Marvel movie from 1998, which is considered by many to be kind of the beginning of the modern Marvel movie cycle, right? And was a terrific adaptation of that character. And again, just to show how comics and movies and TV kind of all intertwine with these classic characters and themes. Here's a Classics Illustrated adaptation. It features Rip Van Winkle, but also predominantly features the Headless Horseman. And then here's the Headless Horseman again in a Mad Magazine cover from, I believe, 1960. Okay. And Mad comics were also published by EC Comics, who did Tales from the Crypt. Here's the Headless Horseman again in the 1970s from Marvel. And again, it's a very popular Tim Burton movie. Yeah, that's a good one. And then as a TV series from Fox. So again, these horror characters have a tendency to keep coming back in different forms and different formats. Yeah. So again, as culture, as our culture became more involved with comics and horror and all this sort of thing, it also started showing up in the costumes. And in the 1960s with the Batman TV series, we had some of the first major superhero-related costume for kids. There had been some earlier, but this is where you had more of them being mass-produced and very, very popular. I believe this is from a Sears catalog from the 60s. And you can see a Batman costume there and Superman. And in the lower section there, Captain America. And it was kind of a humble beginnings for the costumes there. That's that Batman costume in real life.
Those
in
were
the
made
60s.
out of fabric, or were they
I
plastic?
believe like fabric, plastic.
Okay.
There were also a series of masks that were kind of this hard plastic that would cut into the little kids. At least I have that memory. But anyway, that's a Wonder Woman costume there of sorts. There's the Hulk, also from the 60s by Ben Cooper Mask, which was a popular manufacturing Halloween costume company then. There's a Spider-Man Ben Cooper outfit. There's a do-it-yourself patterns for parents to make for their kids. Batman and sort of Batman, sort of Superman, and sort of a female action character there too. There's a Batgirl, those were the way they would look in the 60s. As time has progressed, the costumes have become far more sophisticated. And so now there's a Batgirl, modern-day Batgirl outfit, and Supergirl, and Wonder Woman. And for kids, you have Captain Marvel and Black Widow and Wonder Woman. And Shuri from Black Panther. And again, a Black Panther costume for kids now. And again, far more sophisticated than the Batman costume from the 60s. And those are great. To the point where we've gone from a little Hulk mask to now you can have big giant Hulk smash hands and a talking Batman helmet.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we've come a long way in terms of that.
Definitely.
Here's some modern Halloween-related comics. Popular character Hellboy. There's Hellboy Jr., a great cover by Bill Ray. Emily the Strange, popular character. Here's Archie Comics present day, and this is Vampironica, and that cover is by Greg Smallwood, and it's much more different than the little Archie cover we looked at earlier.
Yeah.
So you can see kind of an updating there, as with like the Sabrina TV show and all that. There's Lady Mechanica. That's a terrific cover. That's for a Halloween Comic Fest, which is an annual event.
Okay.
This is a modern graphic novel of Frankenstein. I'll just pull this aside here. 1 second. And that is by, let's see here, Junji Ito. And that just recently came out within the last couple of years. And I believe that won an Eisner for Best Adapted Graphic
I believe
Novel.
it does.
And terrific work. Let's see here. Oh, whoops. Okay. Got stuck there. Oh, okay. I guess we've gotten to the end of it. Have we gone through all the images? All right. So I just wanted to kind of finish up here by we'll just leave it on the Ouroboros Cycle. I also wanted to mention, if we can go back to full screen, I want to show some. Speaking of Junji Ito, I also wanted to show some books here from the Massanutten Library that the local patrons can check out. This is Twisted Visions, which is a collection of Ito's illustration work. Highly recommended.
Just came out.
Very scary and wonderful book. This book is called The Horror, and it's a collection of 1950s comics, a little different than EC. It even has a CD in the back, interactive CD. And fiction, the show recently on HBO, really worth checking out. Excellent book. Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. And a comic adaptation of Stranger Things, the television series. The late, great Anthony Bourdain actually had a horror graphic novel called Hungry Ghosts by a variety of excellent artists. Really well worth checking out. And there's even some recipes in the back. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention The Walking Dead, which actually started out as a comic, and I believe is getting ready to start its last season, or started its last season.
I believe so.
11 seasons, I think it's been on. But anyway, the library has all the like most volumes.
Yeah, we have most of the collection.
So there's plenty to check out here at the library as well. So that's a little bit about horror and Halloween and comics, a little bit of what I'm working on. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, I would like to go back to the Ouroboros Cycle, and our first question here is, where did you get your inspiration as an artist? I was looking at some of the slides there for that. Can you kind of describe where some of your style came from?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, I've been influenced by so many different things as far as just in keeping the theme of what we're talking about here today. You know, my exposure to like horror comics and horror movies and all that was from, you know, my uncles when I was a kid growing up. They were teenagers and they would buy like the creepy and eerie comics, and I would get those secondhand and get a chance to read those.
Right.
On television, they would show old horror movies. So, back when you had a lot of regional affiliates for the stations, they would have a lot of horror hosts. And so a local station would have a horror host, and they would host like old movies, which were very old even back then. So that was like the first, when I would see the first Frankenstein or the first Dracula. I know in the DC area they had Count Gordon host. He was popular. When I was much younger in Indiana, they had Sammy Terry on WTTV4, who was
Sort of like these late night syndicate.
Yeah, like you had Elvira as well out in California. That was more modern, but a lot of times that's before VHS and DVD and now streaming. That was like your initial introduction. So, you know, for me, a lot of times it wasn't just the comics and it was having the influence of seeing like the movies. Like I can remember the first time I saw Christopher Lee as Dracula, which was very contemporary in terms of the fact that he would move around very quickly and be very imposing, as opposed to Bela Lugosi, who was much more, you know, low key and eloquent.
Right.
And now, present day, you have so many different, like, you know, True Blood and so many different interpretations of the vampire characters. But there were a lot of horror artists whose work I really liked growing up, like, and I would see like covers in the bookstore, like Frank Frazetta, for example.
Yeah.
The EC comics weren't really available when I was a kid. They've been reprinted a lot since, but a lot of the EC artists did go to work in the 60s for Creepy and Eerie. So I had the Warren magazine, so I had a chance to see their work for the first time there. So a lot of that stuff was very influential to me in terms of like horror comics and such.
Okay.
And that kind of look.
Great. So. All right, we have another question from a viewer. Are you familiar with the
Svengoolie?
Oh
yeah, sure. It's on MeTV here regionally. I think it's out of the Chicago area, and I usually have it on every Saturday night because I love that. As a kid growing up, I loved the whole horror host thing. So yeah, it's a blast. I really enjoy. I really enjoy him. He's great.
Viewers that aren't familiar with that show.
Svengoolie is it's currently, well, my exposure to it. I know the show's a big history, and it's a show on right now it's on MTV on Xfinity, but it comes on every Saturday night at 8 o'clock.
Okay. And
it's done like the classic old horror host show where he'll introduce the show, and then they'll show clips from the movies, and they'll have some back and forth. So it's a way to frame the movie. Okay. So it's very entertaining. I highly recommend it.
I have to check that out.
Okay.
Another question from a viewer is, your work on the Ouroboros Cycle and your work on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are very different. How did you develop the styles? How did you develop two styles that are so different?
That's a really good question. And getting back earlier to what you had asked me about, you know, my influences and drawing and all that. So when I worked on the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde adaptation, and I was trying to figure out how to adapt that for Classics Illustrated, my thought was there was a certain type of older flowery prose that hadn't been, I think it was written in the late 1800s. And so to counter kind of the heavy text, I wanted to do it almost like a storybook. And so I was actually thinking of doing it more in very stark, almost like a cutout style. So I was thinking of old silent movies like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari that used like German Expressionism.
Yeah.
And German Expressionist painters who would paint in very bold, angular styles. And so that was my approach on Jekyll and Hyde. On Ouroboros, it is much more of a kind of a sweeping epic. And it's very, even though it's set in the 1880s, it's very contemporary in its writing and its style. And it's much more of an adventure. And so in trying to capture that kind of epic scope of J.D. Falksen's work, what I'm trying to have is more of an illustrative approach to that work. So that's where I get into more of something that might involve a little more of a detail, as opposed to kind of the starkness. But I still have like kind of a graphic edge in that work as well. But that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Any favorite costumes as a child that inspired your work?
Oh,
now?
that's a good question too. I'm trying to remember. You know, the costumes, again, is when I was a kid, the costumes were kind of real basic. So, oh, that's a good one. I have to think about that a little bit. I can't, I'm just trying to think of which ones in particular that really struck me as a kid. I got to be honest with you, sometimes what really inspired me as a kid, because I'll tell you what came to mind right away, is not so much a mass-produced costume, but it would be the homemade costumes.
Right.
And I had two friends two brothers that live around the corner from me, and they got two cardboard boxes, a large one and a small one each, and they spray painted them silver, and they just cut holes out of them and made them into like robot costumes and like, you know, put like model parts and all this sort of thing. So, you know, to be honest with you, that was a tremendous source of inspiration to me because of the creativity of it. But, you know, I mean, at the same time, as a kid growing up, I loved, you know, I did love seeing like the Batman costumes, Green Hornet, you know, more of the detective kind of secret agent sort of look.
Sure.
Sometimes there would be some neat monster ones too, but I think that as a kid growing up, it would be like the ones that were homemade, or like I said, like Batman or Green Hornet or Dick Tracy or somebody like that. So anyway, thank you for asking. That's a good question.
Any more questions?
Oh,
We have one coming up in 1 second.
Said there's a question there that inspired me now. Inspire me now. Well, I still think of those robots. And sometimes when I'm doing like retro, kind of retro design, like fantasy or science fiction or something like that, I'll think about things like that. Something that has kind of a homemade, old look to it. You know, like old serials. Like old 1940s serials where you see the stills and the robots and all the costumes are kind of like the one of the boy in the Batman costume from the 60s, where it has this kind of homemade look to it. Do I have a favorite monster from film? Okay. I think my favorite, it's funny, it's always it's kind of a toss-up. I am a big fan of the first Frankenstein movie. That came out with Boris Karloff in '31 with James Whale. I think that is a kind of a perfect, compact little horror movie. And again, visually, I think it's also highly influenced in its design by German Expressionism. I think it's a tremendous influence on Tim Burton's work if you look at some of his stuff.
Well, that and going back to Dr. Caligari as well. I would
Yes, and Caligari, and actually Caligari kind of seeps into the way James Whale's movie looks. But I love the first Frankenstein movie. I'm a major, if this counts as a monster, I'm a major fan of the first King Kong movie because I think it was kind of the first of its kind. But as far as the original monsters go, I always like the Frankenstein story. I do like the 1930, I think 1 or 2 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde with Frederick March. But that was not really available much when I was growing up. That's only recently. I think it was lost, considered kind of lost for a while or out of distribution. But the first Frankenstein movie is a big one. I also am a big fan of the original Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney because I always thought it was very interesting that Lon Chaney did all his costumes by himself, and with what resources he had at that time, he would do all these different things to pull back parts of his face, you know, that were pretty painful. Right. But it was pretty amazing that he had that kind of discipline in his work. So, and I also like the tragic character of the Phantom of the Opera as well. That kind of tragic element in the characters. Next question.
What?
Can you?
1 second there. What led you to become a writer and an illustrator?
I'm not sure. I just think that when I was a kid, I picked up a pencil and I liked telling stories, and I just liked drawing things. I mean, but I think more than drawing, I liked being able to tell some kind of story, even if it was like real basic. Even as a kid, I would try to do more panel as opposed to like a single image. And so I think I was always taken with the story aspect of it. And what I liked about comics was that you could create your own story, you know, all by yourself, you know, and all that. Even though I didn't really have the ability to really draw what I had in my head, you know, I could try, you know, and work at it. But and you know, I was around a lot of creative people growing up. My aunt was an artist, and my uncle is an artist, and my another uncle is a musician, and so being in that kind of environment is really inspirational too.
Sounds like it.
What's that?
What
What
age?
age? That's a good question too. It's hard to say. I just think I just kind of got into it. I just like drawing, and it just seemed to me to be, it's just something that was a natural progression. It just seemed to, there was never a point where I said, I'm going to do this. I just kind of kept doing it, and I just found that it would kind of, I would find myself in opportunities to do artwork for other people, and I just kept applying myself. Maybe to elaborate a little bit on that, I think when I made a decision to try to get published, I was about 20 years old, and I can't remember quite what inspired me to do this, but I thought to myself that I would go ahead and try to write, draw, and letter, pencil, ink, the whole thing, my own character, do a 22-page story, and then find 10 publishers. Like at that time, we didn't have the internet, but I went to the store and would look at where to send submissions. It would be on the contents page. They used to do that back then. And I wrote down all the addresses, and I made 10. It took me about a year to do the book. I was working on it in the evenings. I was working at a graphic studio. I'd come home at night, and I would work on this comic, and then I sent it out to the 10 publishers, at the end of that period. And all 10 of them rejected me, which I knew would happen. I was kind of anticipating that. But I did get a reply. Most of them were form letters. And then I got back a reply from one smaller publisher who actually gave me some tips, hey, this is good, or, but here's some things you need to work on.
Okay.
And so to me, that was a big success, it was a start. And, but it wasn't until, but I wasn't from that point until when I was first actually published. I think it was about a 3-year period. And actually my first publisher ended up being the person that sent me the letter years later. So anyway, if that helps to answer that.
What advice would you give to an aspiring artist?
That's a good question too. Just draw as much as possible. Just keep drawing, and try to learn as many different ways to do in today's age, I would learn how to use as much technology as possible to do the work that you're doing, depending on what it is, I guess, depending on what it is you want to do. If you want to work for publishing, I would say do that. If you want to be involved in fine art or portraiture or any other, physical forms of art, just keep painting and keep doing illustrations. But as far as comics and that sort of thing, I would say keep learning as much as you can about the new things that are coming out. And don't be afraid to show your work. I think that one of the advantages of present day is that you've got Instagram and Facebook and all that. Just keep putting things up, and even if people, you get 1 like or no likes or 10 likes or whatever, just getting in the habit of showing your work on a regular basis is really the key thing to do, is to get kind of a fearlessness about it, and just keep pushing ahead, because I think the answers to a lot of questions sometimes comes through the work. You just keep working, and as you work, it helps you find different paths and leads you to connections with other people. And a lot of times trying to think things through kind of gets in the way of it can kind of stop you from moving forward, if that makes sense. So so I would just say keep drawing, keep learning new techniques, and don't be shy, which is, it's easier said than done, but it's definitely an important part of what helps. So.
What is your favorite thing to draw or write about?
Gosh, that's a good question too. People.
People?
Yeah, I like telling stories about people and things, and I think that as I get more into the stories that I work on and such, I'm interested in telling stories about all kinds of different different themes and such.
Mhm.
It's great to work with fantastic elements, but at the core, I like being involved with stories that are about like people and relationships and you know, life in general. So.
So you've worked on so many great characters. Do you have a favorite DC character that you drew?
Gosh, it's a good question too. I've worked on a lot of different characters, but I mean, it sounds like an easy answer, but I really liked all the characters. I've liked all the characters that I've worked on. I mean, at DC, you know, I worked on Suicide Squad, which was such an unusual set of characters, but I liked them all. I really liked working on Bronze Tiger. He was like the first character I worked on at DC. He was the leader of the Suicide Squad at that time. I also, of course, really enjoyed working on the Dr. Midnight miniseries. I drew that. Matt Wagner was the writer on that because we got a chance to reimagine this classic golden age character from the 1940s, which was a personal favorite of mine too. So I had a great time with that too. But really, in general, I've always enjoyed all the characters I've worked on, and really in present time. I mean, I'm really enjoying working on the Ouroboros Cycle characters, the Dr. Varanus and Yusuf and the Scion and all that. I mean, it's always exciting to work on new characters and get involved in new projects too. So that's an ongoing thing. But yeah, no, those two come to mind from DC. But there were a lot of fun ones that I had a chance to work on. So.
Kind of tying into the same question. What comic or graphic novel was your favorite to work on in that era?
Well, like I said, they're all kind of my favorite. They really are. You know, I have an affinity apparently for doctors because I mean, I have to say, you know, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde adaptation is a real favorite. But I followed that up with The Secret Agent from Joseph Conrad. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And again, Dr. Midnight was a lot of fun too. But I think you'll find if you get involved with working on characters and projects yourself, I think you'll find that you as well will find that you spend so much time with these characters when you're working on the illustration and such that you have some kind of affinity for all of them at one point or another. Right?
They're all your children.
Yeah, I think everybody. I think you would feel the same way if you find yourself working on your own characters or that sort of thing. That you would kind of have the same attitude about it too.
Okay, we got one more question here. It looks like
it says, "I am curious how the business end works."
Yeah.
I am too. That's a good question. I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. That's an ongoing learning process. But anyway, how do you get a contract for a project, for a graphic novel? I mean, that's okay. I think that's a question because it's an ever-changing market and how all that works. So I can give you an example of a personal experience I had. Like, say, the first sort of graphic novel that I worked on was that Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde adaptation. So I had actually been working in comics for a few years at that point. So some people knew of my work, and I just got a call before email. You know, you get a phone call. I got a phone call asking that if I would work on this series, and so that's how that came about. It was first a request from the editor. The editor then sent me a contract in the mail, and then we went forward from there. But in other cases, so if you have relationships with publishers, if you manage to develop those, you can present your ideas to a publisher or an editor, get in a relationship with them where you can show, you know, a working relationship where you can show the work to them and they can tell you what the possibilities are. Now, that was kind of what it used to be like. I know more as the market is moving more into graphic novels, that it's more of a book market. And when you get into a book market, you have to get an agent. And that is something that is very difficult. I've just started recently working with an agent, but that was after a great period of time. So it's a matter of developing. And again, I'm trying to give you an answer because I know it's tough to start out. And I'm trying to think about how would I present this in present day. Is that you have to keep trying to make connections, and posting your artwork on Twitter, posting your artwork on any form of social media, Facebook, whatever, will raise the familiarity of your work to people that are looking for artists. I think that is the best way I can put it. And through meeting other artists and through meeting other writers, you can start to get lead-ins to them talking to you about agents as well.
Okay.
It's not easy. I'll be honest. It's not an easy thing. But again, as I said, beginning, what recommendations I'd make to an artist, just keep drawing and put as much of your stuff out there as you can, because it's that communication that will get you in touch with other people.
Okay.
Ultimately.
Did you go to art school?
I went to George Mason University, and I went there about 1.5 years. And I did not major in art at that time. I did have an excellent life drawing teacher, and I had a great design teacher. And I actually took typography. And typography came in very handy for me in comics. And the life drawing came in. All these things helped out. So I did get some art instruction from school. A lot of the instruction I got was from fellow artists that I worked with. That helped out a tremendous amount. So. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
What?
Got one more, it looks like.
Okay.
Is there a character or a type of character you would like to use to create a graphic novel?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of different characters that I'm interested in, and a lot of different themes and a lot of different, presently I like working with my creator-owned characters like fashion and action, but at present, and I'm always looking at other books and novels and movies and all that kind of thing for ideas for characters and such. At present, I'm very happy adapting the Ouroboros characters. I'm really good with that right now. I'm also working on new fashion and action material.
Okay.
So at the moment, I'm set. I did want to mention too, before we close here, I did want to mention that speaking of characters and art and advice and all that sort of thing, I wanted to mention that Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley, and she was 19 when she created that character. And she created that character. What had happened was that she was with her husband and a couple other, I believe a poet and I believe a physician, and they weren't able to go out because of inclement weather. So they were cooped in, and they started telling each other ghost stories. And was within the context of those ghost stories, she got the idea for Frankenstein. So, and also Robert Louis Stevenson created Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, that character after a brief illness. So one thing I wanted to say was that, one thing that I would encourage any of you artists out there is to create your own characters. You can create your own Frankenstein or Dracula or Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, and I know that we're not really spending time or the holidays like we normally would like to, and this could be a unique time to come up with your own sort of character or monster or some kind of classic iconic character, all your own. So funny things can come out of situations like today where it can bring forth some creativity for all of us, you know. So I'd really want to encourage everyone out there that does write or draw to use this Halloween holiday season to kind of brainstorm on your own too and come up with some of your own ideas. See what you come up with.
Use your quarantine time, and
Yeah,
yeah.
you just never know, you know. And I think some really great creative things could come out of this era.
Absolutely.
For sure.
All right, one last question here. Are there any characters that you really dislike illustrating?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think, you know, not really. I mean, I think there was a few characters here and there where you kind of look at them and you go, really?
Yeah.
But I always found a way to have fun with it,
Okay.
you know? I never really disliked anybody. I'll tell you a funny story though, since you asked that. When I started working on Suicide Squad back in the late 80s, there was a ton of characters. It was like a crossover between a couple of different books.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a character called the Peacemaker. And the Peacemaker it looked like a giant hairdryer on his head, and he had a jetpack and he flew around, right?
Yeah.
And it was a really funny looking character. You can look him up. He was a Charlton character, which was a smaller company. And then they moved him over to DC. And when I first saw him, I was like, I'm not sure how I'm going to make this work, right? But I ended up drawing the character, and I thought it actually, I had a lot of fun with it,
Yeah.
right? And so it's funny how it turned out. Well, the funny thing about it is that all these years later, the Peacemaker character is one of the main characters in the new Suicide Squad movie, and he's played by John Cena. And the feedback so far on John Cena's version of Peacemaker is going over so well. They've already announced an HBO series.
Really?
So I guess the moral of the story, it's the funny part of the story is here was a character that looked so silly to me initially, and now he's going to be the star of an HBO show, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the funny thing about all this, is that you can see something and initially it looks like you can't quite figure out what to make of it, but it could turn out to be like the coolest character of them all, you know, or at least the most fun or something like that. So I haven't ever really had one that I actually disliked, but I did have a couple of double takes initially, but I always ended up having fun with it. So anyway, thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. So.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please check out the Macedon Regional Library has several of John Snyder's works in our collection, and we have an ever-growing graphic novel collection as well. So please come in and check out his works if you haven't. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank
Happy
you so
Halloween.
much for coming. Happy Halloween. Thank you.